Tonight, growing threats from China.
We're not going to let this intimidation, get to us.
The new warning from Beijing as the United States deepens ties with Taiwan. Plus, the latest on unemployment in America. And
for me, it is the #1 thing in my life, so I hope that it's imbued in everything that I do.
Fox News anchor Shannon Breams on how her faith influences every aspect of her life. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. The United States headed down a dangerous path. Welcome to Faith Nation from our News Bureau in Washington. I'm John Jessup. Well, that warning coming tonight from China as lawmakers further cement America's relationship with Taiwan, reflected in a bipartisan congressional delegation arriving today in the capital of Taipei. It comes just one day after Taiwan's president met with the U.S. Speaker of the House in California, which prompted China to promise retaliation. CBN national security correspondent Caitlin Burke has more. Caitlin, Beijing responded pretty dramatically last year when then-Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. So far, though, that promised retaliation seems fairly muted.
That's right, John. Beijing launched a nearly week-long war game exercise in the waters off of Taiwan following that Pelosi visit last August. This time, we heard a lot of rhetoric ahead of Speaker McCarthy's Wednesday meeting with Taiwan's president, the communist regime calling it a provocation and promising, quote, resolute action. But their actual response has been pretty anticlimactic. The Chinese Navy announced a 3-day Coast Guard patrol operation in the Taiwan Strait to inspect commercial ships. And they've sent an aircraft carrier about 200 miles off the coast of Taiwan. Taiwanese officials say it's all designed to intimidate the island without threatening open conflict.
So, Caitlin, going back to that congressional delegation, what's the goal there?
Well, Representative Mike McCall is leading that group. He's the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and he and the other lawmakers there from both parties are on the island for 3 days discussing security and trade. McCall made a point to note that China may be issuing threats, but he told reporters the intimidation tactics aren't going to work.
Being here, I think, sends a signal to the Chinese Communist Party that the United States supports Taiwan and that we're going to harden Taiwan, and we want them to think twice about invading Taiwan.
The group will meet with Taiwan's president over the weekend to talk about a weapons delivery from the U.S. Weapons, McCall says, are specifically meant to deter Chinese aggression. John?
All right, CBN national security correspondent Caitlin Burke. Thank you so much, Caitlin. Well, turning to the economy, new jobless claims are on the rise. The most recent figures out today from the Labor Department show 228,000 people applied for new unemployment benefits last week. That marks 9 straight weeks the number has been above 200,000. Overall, around 2 million people are receiving unemployment aid, though on the rise, that's still historically low. Tomorrow, the Labor Department will release the March jobs report. A Wall Street Journal survey says economists predict 238,000 jobs were added last month, down from 311,000 in February. Well, for more, let's bring in Mark Hamrick, Washington Bureau Chief and Senior Economic Analyst for Bankrate. Mark, let's start there. Analysts believe the number of new jobs added in March will exceed 200,000, but that's down significantly from the first couple of months of 2023. Does that signal that the job market is losing steam?
I think that's exactly right, John. We expect that the job market will slow rather dramatically over the course of this year, and that's consistent with the sort of consensus view that the risks of recession have only risen in recent weeks and months, particularly with the banking crisis that we experienced. We don't know if that's completely behind us just yet, but even the ramifications of what we've recently experienced are significant because it's expected to result in a pullback in lending. We just completed, in fact, John, a survey of economists of Bankrate. We have 4 different stories on the site about that by my colleague Sarah Foster. And the survey of economists indicates that they think the unemployment rate, if we take the consensus view, will rise to about 4.6% over the next year. Remember, we're now in the mid 3% range. And we actually have an outlook for declining jobs. In other words, we won't be adding jobs over the next year. We'll actually see a decline, contraction in employment over the next year. That is a bit of a severe scenario, but that's what the outlook is right now, John.
Along the lines of that survey, there's a part of the survey that shows 56% of workers plan to look for a new job in the next year. Mark, why is that? And is that something the job market can support?
Well, I doubt that they all find new jobs, John. This is our job seekers survey, and it found exactly what you talked about there. And even more interestingly, higher numbers for those that intend to look for more work among those who are the youngest workers, which is Generation X as well, or Generation Z, as well as millennials. That takes us up between age 18 to 42. So if even a good part of those workers are successful, they are prioritizing higher pay. About 1 in 3 are looking for higher pay as their top priority, but a lot of them are also looking for better work-life balance, better working conditions, a culture that's more in line with their view of the world or what work ought to look like. And of course, one of the reasons I think they're elevating that priority for higher pay, John, is something that we've been talking about for a long time now, and that is the high and sustained level of inflation. And so as people didn't make the gains against inflation with their wages that they would have liked, one way they're hoping to rectify that, get a higher paying job.
Mark, real quickly here, how much does it concern you that we've seen unemployment applications above 200,000 for the 9th straight week?
I think one of the most important things we're seeing, John, is that the job market's a little weaker than what we thought before. The number of job openings coming down more than expected. Now we have more people getting unemployment insurance. So this long-awaited slowdown in the job market appears to now be in process.
All right, Mark Hamrick with Bankrate. We always appreciate your insights, and happy Easter.
Same to you, John. Thank you.
Well, already jobs and the economy are central issues for those vying for the nation's top job. The latest to join that field, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., JFK's nephew, officially filing paperwork to challenge fellow Democrat President Joe Biden. Meanwhile, on the Republican front, the campaign of former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley released its first round of fundraising numbers. They show that in the first 6 weeks of her presidential run, she raised more than $11 million. That number outpaces former President Trump's fundraising, who amassed $9.5 million the first 6 weeks of his campaign. Well, let's bring in Julia Manchester, national political reporter for The Hill. Julia, Nikki Haley's fundraising efforts seem to be going really well, but most polling has her trailing former President Trump and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. What's the disconnect there?
Yeah, she is doing really well in terms of fundraising, but, she is having trouble connecting with these voters, according to the polls. Now, in terms of President Trump's fundraising, we are seeing that he is getting a boost from all the coverage surrounding his indictment and arrest. In fact, his campaign says they raised over $7 million since he was indicted a week ago today. So that's over half of what Nikki Haley raised in the first quarter. So clearly President Trump has that war chest. He has that name ID. And I think that's part of the reason why he's polling so better. And I think just judging by the response from Haley and other GOP hopefuls or potential hopefuls at President Trump's indictment, it still shows how much of a grip he has on the Republican Party, because they're essentially saying, agreeing with him and saying that this was politicized and that Alvin Bragg made a wrong move in going after Trump. So I think for a candidate like Haley, Nikki Haley, or even, potential candidates like Mike Pence or Mike Pompeo or Tim Scott, it's really going to come down to how they pay attention to these individual early states like New Hampshire, like South Carolina, like Iowa. Because one advantage that Nikki Haley has compared to a Ron DeSantis or even a Donald Trump is she's really good with voters one-on-one. I mean, a lot of people will walk away having a conversation with her feeling good, and she's very good at engaging voters in that way. So you're going to hear her campaign very much tout that as we hear some of this, more of this narrative about her maybe falling behind in those national polls.
Julia, we only have about a minute left, but you just mentioned a Republican Senator Tim Scott. Since you invoked his name, he's set to visit Iowa, New Hampshire, and his home state of South Carolina next week. What is support like for him if he were to officially enter the presidential race?
Yeah, it's still in the single digits. It's still very low. He would absolutely have to work on building up that name ID, building up that fundraising apparatus. In a place like South Carolina, look, I think there could be a real battle between him and Nikki Haley because they're both well-known Republican names in those states. But he's going to have to build up that name ID in Iowa and New Hampshire, two places that he's not as familiar with, and those voters aren't as familiar with him as well.
Julia, real quickly here, any idea on who might file next within the Republican primary?
You know, it's a good question. A lot of us are looking towards Ron DeSantis and when he, should eventually file to run for president. Look, I think a lot of it will depend on when Florida state legislative session wraps up next month, but we'll have to see. He's very much trying to, I think, play the field here and see how things, play out. I mean, looking at the indictment of Donald Trump last week, that was such a seismic event that occurred in politics. So I think Ron DeSantis is looking to see how those events impact the primary as a whole.
All right. We're going to have to leave it there. Julia Manchester with The Hill, we always appreciate your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Getting physical for the sake of the gospel, a strategy for getting and staying fit while spreading the good news. Well, welcome back. No end in sight, at least in the short term, as areas along the East Coast face the threat of severe weather tonight. It comes after 2 days of deadly tornadoes tearing through the Midwest. The cleanup is underway in the aftermath of more than a dozen tornadoes touching down from Iowa to Illinois. One in Missouri Wednesday claimed the lives of at least 5 people. This severe weather system means millions of Americans remain on alert. A devastating tornado outbreak last week killed at least 30 people. Well, if you want to lead a healthy lifestyle, doctors often stress the importance of exercise. Sometimes, though, you have to get creative to figure out a way to work in working out. Some Christians have come up with a creative solution. CBN medical reporter Lori Johnson introduces us to a ministry balancing fitness and faith. It's called Garage Gym Church.
That's it, don't stop.
On the surface, this may look like a typical workout session. Garage Gym Church, however, is a new type of Christian outreach.
Our focus is on men to give them a place where they could have camaraderie, where they could reach out to other men in like a sense of a band of brothers, growing together in the common man cave, the garage.
Turns out a garage gym can be a good place for men to let down their guard.
There's something disarming about when you're all sweating together and working out hard and you're at the end of a workout where it's like you have these vulnerable moments where you can actually open up and share some deep stuff with each other. And to create those moments with guys is priceless.
A home gym ministry is an example of how anyone can take their gifts, in this case, a simple, ordinary garage, and use them to serve God. What makes this approach even easier is lots of folks already work out in their garage.
During COVID times when gyms are shut down, there's garage gyms popping up all over the place. In fact, you couldn't even get gym equipment because everything was sold out.
Chris Reardon found he experienced spiritual growth by combining his private home workout with high-energy praise music, prayer, scripture, and excerpts from fiery sermons. So he invited his Christian friends to join him.
There comes a time in your life you get tired of being defeated, you get tired of being slapped around by the devil.
It's like a church small group with a testosterone twist.
It's like a locker room. We're standing up, hey, we're talking, and you're going to say today, hey, got 90 seconds, give me a God story, go. Hey, we're going to pray for each other right now, right? To really get this idea that this is something more, I guess, manly, if you will, because a lot of guys just don't pray together, right?
Marine Francis Edkid discovered how the venue provides a comfortable way to share his faith with non-believers.
Some of the sailors that I work that are having internal struggles, I bring them out here. And so I was like, hey, let's face that challenge together, man. Let's go.
Faith and Fitness magazine is spreading the word to churches and individuals about exactly how to start their own garage gym ministry.
It's not to take the place of regular church, but let's be honest.
There's a whole world out there that's never going to get to what we call regular church, and for them, this may very well be it.
So while many Christians may feel working out is too time-consuming or selfish, consider combining this physical activity with Christian outreach to see how it can benefit both body and spirit. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Thank you, Lori. From news anchor to author, Fox News' Shannon Breams shares insights from her newest book about the Bible when Faith Nation returns. Welcome back. She's a familiar face now at the helm of the Fox News Network's signature Sunday morning show. When Shannon Bream is not broadcasting, one way she keeps busy is by writing best-selling books about the Bible. Jenna Browder recently sat down with Bream to talk faith, her new role at Fox, and her latest book.
At this point, she's a household name.
Part of this, they say, was because of the pandemic.
Shannon Bream, longtime Fox News anchor and correspondent. Plus, she loves Jesus.
How does faith inform your job here at Fox?
For me, it is the number one thing in my life, so I hope that it's imbued in everything that I do.
That includes starting her day in the Word.
Reading, praying, journaling, I really enjoy as well. So that sets me up for the day. And if I'm in a hurry, if I oversleep, if I hit that snooze too many times and I miss that in the morning, I know it's going to be a more challenging day. But God goes with us as believers and walks us through those things. So for me to spend that time with him in the morning and lay that foundation is how I do everything else.
Shannon started at Fox News back in 2007. Since then, she's held many positions at the network, most recently being promoted to host of the highly esteemed Fox News Sunday.
It is an amazing show because it's one of these Sunday shows that puts down the marker for political discussions, and it has such a long tradition and history before I got here. So when I joined, there was already this excellent team of researchers and bookers and producers in place. So it's been a real privilege to walk into that and to say, okay, what new can we add, or additional twists, or how can we reach more viewers, younger people, different people who may not be as involved in these political conversations?
Is there an issue that you've, I guess, found most difficult to cover, or maybe most interesting to cover?
I think Ukraine's been really difficult. I think that Vladimir Putin, when he went in, thought a few days, I'll take what I want, Kyiv will fall, and I'll take what I want of Ukraine. Never seeing the resilience and the grit and the determination, underestimating that in the Ukrainian people. We've had journalists there repeatedly from day one. We lost 2 of our colleagues, and Ben Hall survived but suffered devastating injuries. He's been such an incredible inspiration to us and reminding us of why it's important that journalists stay on stories like that and stay there to talk about the people who their lives are torn apart.
You know, one issue that's really important to our viewers is religious freedom, and it seems like that's just an issue that keeps coming before the Supreme Court. I wonder if you might comment on that.
Absolutely does. And I think everybody who's in tune with that issue remembers a few years ago when the baker out of Colorado, Jack Phillips, had his case before the Supreme Court for a cake that he didn't want to do, a custom cake for same-sex wedding, although he said he was happy to serve LGBTQ couples and let them choose from what was in his store. But it got to this question of, what do Christian business owners, what is their obligation in the stream of commerce with people with differing viewpoints? And the Supreme Court really didn't resolve all of the underlying issues in that case, so they're back at it now.
With 2 big cases, a Pennsylvania postman being forced to work on Sundays, and another involving a Colorado web designer.
This is written by Justice Gorsuch, deciding in favor of the coach.
As the network's chief legal correspondent, Shannon will be covering them all this spring. When she's not on the air, you can find Shannon writing, Finding the Bright Side, her first book and memoir, followed by bestsellers, The Women of the Bible Speak, The Mothers and Daughters of the Bible Speak, and her newest, The Love Stories of the Bible Speak.
I found that in writing the last 2 books, we focused on women a lot, but there are always men in the stories too. And some of these we thought were really beautiful stories about romance and what God says about marriage. And all of these things that he designed, and maybe Christians sometimes are uncomfortable talking about, the sex, the romance, the dating. But obviously God designed all of those relationships for us. And we thought there's so many beautiful ones, from Adam and Eve to Song of Solomon, that some people are hesitant to try to dig into that and actually figure out what that means to our marriage in our lives now.
Tell us a little bit about you and Sheldon.
So we've been married 27 years, and our favorite saying we say all the time is like, we are not perfect, but we're perfect for each other. And we feel like we've made this lifelong commitment. And if you're married for more than 5 minutes, I say, you're going to have a dust up of some kind. But I think when you've made your vows before God and your family, and you have the support of your community, your Christian community, your church community, that will get you through a lot of rough waters.
Shannon admits they've had their ups and downs like everyone else. Sheldon being diagnosed with a brain tumor shortly after they got engaged, and Shannon having long dealt with a painful eye disease. Through it all, though, they've been there for each other.
He's my best friend, which I think is an added bonus to being in marriage. And I just think we really try hard to model what God has set out for us. Sheldon to love sacrificially, as Christ loved the church, me to respect him, and really to be each other's #1 cheerleaders.
In this latest book, Shannon writes about the greatest love of all, God's love for all of us. And yes, loving your neighbor.
And remember when Christ was discussing so many times in the New Testament about what are the greatest commandments. Yes, we're to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and spirit, but also to love your neighbor as yourself. And there aren't exceptions to that. We don't get to pick and choose.
You have this new book, new show. I don't know if you're quite thinking about it yet, but what's next for Shannon?
Oh my goodness, a nap. No. You know what? I just feel so grateful for every opportunity that's come my way. I'm working on a fiction book. It's something I've never tried before. I really enjoy great fiction. I admire so many of the writers who are out there, like Karen Kingsbury. Those who are no longer here, like Jane Austen. I'm a big fan of Fannie Flagg, and so not that I can measure up to what they do, but I would aspire maybe to. I think there are ways that you can share messages and encourage people through fictional stories as well. So maybe one day I'll get that done.
In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Thank you, Jenna. Coming up, the major mix-up that scored one man a free trip to the Masters. And finally tonight, the Masters Golf Tournament kicks off today at Augusta National, and thanks to a case of mistaken identity, Scott Stallings has a front row seat. And not Scott Stallings, the pro golfer. Although they share the same name, when Stallings, the Atlanta realtor, got the invitation to play in the iconic golf event, he forwarded the real invite to his PGA namesake. In return, Stallings, the golf pro, gifted his alter ego free tickets to the Masters and a framed invitation signed from one Scott Stallings to another, and not a bad exchange for the other Scott Stallings. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Faith Nation. We'll see you next time. Have a great night.